Without the appropriate amount of coffee, I don't function. That's just the rules. Pat, we have owned between us a fair number of airplanes and a pretty good variety of airplanes, a whole bunch of things from a J3 Cub on my side to a Cirrus SR22 on your side.
Yeah,
We've been individual owners, we've been co owners.
right.
But of all those airplanes, I think there's only one we've both owned, which would be a Cessna 182.
You are right, sir. 182 P model for me.
I'm sorry, which one was it?
A P model. Well, the first one was an N model, and the second one, the one I have now, is a P.
Mine was a G, and it had the extended range tanks. So
Ah,
I had, I believe, 80 gallons of
yeah.
fuel
That would be
available,
the
which
extended.
meant you
Yeah,
had to be a little careful with how you loaded it. But
yeah.
man, that airplane would cruise for way longer than my bladder was going to be happy with it.
That's the case with mine. I've got the extended range tanks. The normal tanks on mine, I think, are 56 or 60 gallons. I've forgotten. I've got 80.
I think the factory ones were like 67 gallons,
Something
but
like that. Yeah. There are so many changes from the A model back in 1956 to the current models, different engines, the swept back, no back window,
mhm.
yeah, straight tail, Venturi tube, to the 0540, which the current ones are being made with 92 gallon tanks. And still rated at 230 horses, but the 0540 instead of the 0470.
Well, and that's part of it. I learned to fly in a 152 and then stepped up to a 172 where you're way up there at 160 horsepower, and some people have 180. But boy, that jump, especially from the 152, where very similar looking panels. Cessna's always done a great job making panels look very
Right.
similar. But going from 110 horsepower to 230, 235, whatever, that's a heck of a jump. And you really do notice it when you get that prop into flat pitch and you're at the hold short line and you throttle up. It really goes.
It does, and it's not just that, but it's going from what's a 150 these days or 152 these days, around 1,500 pounds or something.
1640.
Yeah, something like that, and to the newest 182s, which are 3,100 pounds. Mine's 2,950, if I remember right. Um, that's also a big jump when you're talking about going up, you know, almost 2,000 pounds. Um, in addition to the horsepower, that's a big difference.
Boy, I'll tell you, I can recall when I was in flight school, I had a friend, Scott, who's off in Indonesia now. He lives in Bali. It's a horrible life.
Oh, horrible.
But we would take turns shooting ILSs in a 152. And man, that's just the squirreliest thing in the world. You're always chasing the needles. And then you go do it in a 182. It's rock solid. It's like sitting on a couch in your living room. It's just put it on the glide slope and there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about power management, pitch plus power equal performance. If you know what your throttle settings are, in mine, 15 inches on the downwind leg trimmed for straight and level flight is 90 knots. And if I do that and I'm diligent to make sure that at 15 inches, I'm at 90 knots, and it is just as soon as the sun comes up every morning, I can land that airplane without having to touch the trim.
Well, and that's one of the great things about the 182 that I'll be honest, I didn't really know until I owned one. And I had flown one as an instructor at a flight school I worked at, but I really never put it together that if I'm just going up to see the sights, taking somebody on a ride, and I'm feeling a little cheap that day, I can level off and throttle back, as you say, 15 inches, 2,300 RPMs, and I'm only burning about 9 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm having a beautiful flight and everything's great. But if I'm going someplace with that spectacular 1,000 pounds or better useful load, I could go up, 24 squared or something, and I'm moving 130 knots. It's what a difference from the 152 or the 172 or the PA 28 I'd been flying. Man, all of a sudden I could get some real distance and do it comfortably.
Yeah, the speeds, of course, changed a little bit over the years. But if you flight plan for about 130 135 knots true um, on most of the newer models in particular. When I say newer models, I'm talking about post 1970.
Yeah.
If you flight plan for somewhere around 130, 135 knots true, you won't be far off, and you'll be burning between 13 and 14 gallons an hour on the 0470s. Now on the 0540s, um, it's probably closer to 14 or 15, but still, you're knocking out 150 statute miles every or more every hour, and and even with a headwind, you're still covering some ground in a respectable manner, relatively economically in an airplane that every single mechanic can work on.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I always love going to Key West.
Mm,
It's my getaway place. I live in the center of Florida. I live in the geographic center of the panhandle. Or I'm sorry, of the peninsula.
the
Those
peninsula.
P words, they confuse me. But I live in the center. If I drive to Key West, it's 6 to 9 hours, depending on what the traffic is like.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I had to go down once to meet with some high school kids at Key West High, which is right under the approach to the airport. It's a little island, everything's close.
Right.
But from my house to Key West was 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I literally, with the 182, I can literally fly down to Key West, have a business meeting, go to lunch, walk around a little bit, see the sights, and get home well in time for dinner. And it's just such a comfortable thing. That's kind of a remarkable deal where the 182, I can carry the load I want to carry. I can
Yeah.
cruise at a reasonable speed. I'm not burning an outrageous amount of fuel. Fixed gear. So, I mean, mine was a fixed gear. I don't have any problem with forgetting that step on landing. It's just an absolutely great airplane developed from the 180, the tail dragger version
Yeah.
that came prior to
Yeah.
it. But I can't think of anything bad about the 182, with the exception of they always seem to drip oil on the nose gear as they've been in the hangar.
Well, I've not had that problem, but I'll echo your sentiment. My wife and I met some family up in Branson, Missouri, back in I guess it was in June, and it took us. It was 4 hours each way. We happened to have just a little bit of a tailwind both directions over the course of the week that we were there, and it was 4 hours, so 8 hours round trip. The drive would have been over 10 hours from Houston to Branson because there's no direct way to get there over and around the mountains. My brother and his wife live in Austin, just north of the Georgetown airport. And in the 182, it's right at not maybe 55 minutes from my home airport, which is on the way to Austin. So I don't have to backtrack to get there. It's about 55 minutes. Otherwise, it's 3.5 hours in the car. So, boy, I tell you what, that spoils you.
It really does. Now, we talk a fair amount about the joys of ownership or co-ownership and that it is possible. But one of the things we should probably touch on is most of us start out with a relatively low horsepower engine, fixed pitch prop. It's a fairly simple airplane to fly, and we learn the basics. You really do need to transition train. Find an instructor who can transition you up to a 182, because not only is it a bunch more power, and being over 200 horsepower, it does require a sign off to
Yeah,
be able to fly that.
yeah. High performance.
But you've got manifold pressure now and a constant speed prop, so there's a little more to do, but that just increases the efficiency of the aircraft. And as we're saying, we can dial back and burn less fuel, or we can throttle up and really cover a lot of distance. But knowing how to do that correctly and how to manage all that, it does require some transition training, but
Yeah.
really a couple hours, maybe 5 at the most, wouldn't you think?
Oh, at the most, there are several things to remember when you're flying an airplane that has manifold pressure gauge and a constant speed prop. And that is that for every 1,000 feet you go up, the manifold pressure goes down 1 inch. And it really is that simple. And there will come a point where you can't get any more. So whereas you might be able to comfortably cruise at, let's just say 23 squared, that's the top of the green on my airplane, 23 squared at 3,000 feet, maybe even four. You start getting much above that, and you get eight or 9,000 feet, and you might be able to pull 20 or 21 inches, maybe.
Mhm.
Of course, the RPM you can do it set that however you want to with the blue knob, but the biggest thing is you got to remember is when you come down, the manifold pressure goes up 1 inch per thousand feet. So
Without you touching the throttle at all.
without you touching the throttle. So the way I always taught that was there's not much you can do going uphill in a normally aspirated, non-turbocharged engine, a 182, but coming downhill. Let's just say that you're just flying along. You're not necessarily on the autopilot, and you want to come down at a constant speed descent, and essentially, if you pull the manifold pressure back about 1 inch per 100 feet per minute you want to go down, then you'll set yourself up for about a 500 foot per minute rate of descent. So if we're pulling 23 inches, we want to come down 500 feet a minute. Just set the RPM, the manifold pressure at 18 inches, and you gradually ease it back to 18 inches so the airplane doesn't want to kind of do that while it settles in. And the airplane will come down at 500 feet a minute. You could tweak it a little bit if it's a little bit too much or not quite enough. But the thing about it is, when you're 1,000 feet lower now, it's now at 19 inches. So you kind of got to keep easing that throttle back just a little bit to maintain that differential. And when you're where you need to be, just go ahead and push the throttle back in for the manifold pressure to come back up to your 23 inches, and you're back to where you were with little, if any, need to retrim the airplane. So it's power management in those big bore engines is a thing.
Yeah, whenever I've checked people out in a 182, and I do enjoy that because it's a really fun airplane to
Yeah.
fly. That stability and performance is terrific. There's two things that I really focus on early on. One of them is kind of what you're talking about. When we transition from cruise to being in the pattern, it takes a while to slow this thing down.
Yeah.
It's a fairly slippery airplane, although it doesn't look like it. So we can't just barrel into the pattern the way we would in an airplane with a fixed pitch propeller. We have to plan this before we get there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Otherwise, we're going to be going lickety split on downwind.
Yeah.
This isn't going to work out.
Yeah. And that takes a little bit of practice, but honestly, it isn't that difficult. It's just, I mean, it's the weight of the airplane. There's a lot of inertia with all that weight.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the airplane's a little bit slippery, but it's mostly just its weight and it's that inertia. And there's ways to fix that problem. And really, after two or three tries, you'll have it down.
Yeah. The other thing I really focus on, and I'm big on this, so I'd be curious your perspective because we've never discussed this before, being very secretive people as we are.
Yeah.
If when you're landing the 182 as you come in on short final, just keep flying it, and when you get through the flare, keep working the yoke back. If you
Mhm.
haven't hit the stops yet, you're not done. And it's one of the things we see out there in the used Cessna 182 market is a lot of bent firewalls because it sits a little nose high when you're on the ground. It's not the same sight picture as that 172 had. So you really have to make sure you work that yoke back and you're touching on the mains, not the nose gear, because that 0470 is a much bigger, heavier engine. And you can have some surprises if you're not diligent in your control on landing.
Yeah, but that technique that you describe is actually the proper technique for most single engine trainers, whether it's a Archer, a Warrior, a 172, a 152, or whatever. You have to keep working that yoke back, and you should touch down solidly on the mains with the nose in a pretty nose high pitch position. But it's particularly important to pay attention to that, as you said, in the 182, because the nose is so heavy. That's the one thing. The very first time I flew a 182, that was the very first thing that surprised me, and it's the first thing that surprises everybody I check out in a 182, and that is how heavy the pressure is on the yoke when you're just sitting on the ground with no
Hmm.
prop wash going over it. It is heavy. And of course, what does that mean? Is because the nose is heavy and you've got all that weight on the nose wheel. I actually tend to taxi with some back pressure on the yoke, just to try to keep a little bit of the weight off of that nose wheel. Not like not
I do the
necessarily
same
like,
thing. I
yeah,
do the
not like a,
exact same thing for the same reason.
yeah, not like a soft field takeoff necessarily, but with a little bit more back a little more aft pressure than I might ordinarily have. Yeah.
Well, I really do think the 182, for all those reasons, its ability to carry a load, you could get long range tanks. So I think the new one advertises a endurance of something like 900 miles. Now, granted,
Yeah.
it depends on wind, but you really can travel across the nation in a 182 fairly
Easily.
comfortably.
Yeah.
It's got so many good things. It really is. If you're thinking about being an aircraft owner and I want to be able to fly locally, I want to have some fun and go see the sights, but I might want to take a trip or two every year. The 182 is a really good choice. And as you say, they've been manufacturing it and it's been on the market since 1956 with the straight
Hmm.
tail. It's
Yeah.
still in production now.
Yeah.
There's a huge, huge diversity of models and performance, and it's really worth looking at.
Yeah, price ranges too. And I'll tell you what, I can't really speak for the 0540 because I haven't owned one of those models with the 0540 engine in it. But the 0470s are just about bulletproof. We talk about that in kind of vague terms, but um, I just put the 182 mine in annual about a month ago, and I'm getting it today. But it had to have a cylinder. Now it's got 11 almost 1200 hours on a 1500-hour TBO engine, and the reason that it had to have a cylinder was because the compression on that cylinder was
Oh,
eight,
that's a little low.
eight, not 80, eight,
Not even in double digits.
not even in double digits. And so it ended up being a burned valve. I've got a picture of it, a burned valve and a broken compression ring. But I got to tell you, um, it ran. I mean, to the day I took it into the annual, when I was taxiing it in, it was running smooth, like there was nothing wrong with it. No indication on the engine monitor that there was anything wrong with it. My true airspeed was about 130 knots, which is what it's been ever since I've had it. In other words, on 5 cylinders, basically, the engine is running smoothly and producing the same amount of power, at least on the surface, I've been used to seeing since I've had the airplane. So I don't know what to expect now with 6 full working cylinders when I pick it
That
up.
might be a nice surprise. But that kind of leads to the point. I've owned one, you've had a couple, and you have one right now.
Yeah,
That 182, it's important to get a good pre-buy
yeah,
inspection because especially if you've got one that's 40, 50, 60 years old,
oh
it's worth knowing. I mean, the 182 is older than I am.
yeah. Well, I wish I could say the same.
You could say it's older than I am. Sure.
Oh
Go
yeah,
ahead.
it's older
That's
than you
true.
are. You're absolutely right about that.
But no, it's just, I think it's a wonderful airplane. And sometimes folks think, well, I'd love to buy an airplane, but really I'm in the price range for a 150 and that doesn't suit my needs. But with 4 or 5 people involved, a co-ownership type of thing, a 182 is absolutely a doable airplane for a whole lot of us.
Yes.
And that changes the game because now we're not flying something that's a little uncomfortable. It was kind of intended as a trainer. We can't carry much of a load. We
Yeah.
probably don't want to fly 1,000 miles in it, although
Yeah.
I have flown over most of the country in a 152. That 182, all of a sudden, if we can find a way to make that affordable, and maybe it's because you buy one with an old panel and
Maybe.
that you can upgrade it as you go, but we have so many options. But I don't think I've ever met anyone who flew or owned or was a co-owner in a 182 who was dissatisfied. Everybody's like, this is a great airplane.
Yeah, if you look at the used airplane market these days, of course, prices are still up there, and interest rates, unfortunately, are still a little high. But the good news is that there are more 182s in the market today than there were 6 months ago or 8 months ago. That uh, that trend seems to be continuing. So, uh, a good deal, quote, good deal, unquote, is kind of um, a relative thing. But if you find a 182 that is priced fairly, it's not going to last. So
You mean
um,
on the market,
on the
somebody's going to
market,
buy it.
yeah, yeah, and so um, there's really no time like the present. Trying to time the market, just like buying a house. Trying to time the market, it rarely works. So find an airplane that you like, get your financing straight. Better if you can pay cash. Not everybody can, but get your financing set so that when you're ready to pull the trigger, you can put the deposit down pending the pre-buy and all of those other things that we've talked about so many times before. Which might be a good topic for another Mad Props, pre-buy inspections and things like that. Uh,
Not a bad idea, but as you say, one of the great things is more than 23,000 of these have been built. They're still in production, so parts are available.
yeah,
Everywhere you go, the mechanic on the field has seen these and worked on them before. It's not like buying some really odd aircraft that's exciting and cool, but it's like I have a personal affection for Stinsons, and I do love them, but not everybody has experience working on a Franklin engine.
that's right.
Where Continental, oh yeah, we've worked on these before. As a matter of fact, we could even replace a cylinder if it had compression as low as 8. We could go ahead and do that.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise.
Well, Pat, thanks a lot for talking on the topic. You are a great resource on this because you currently own a 182 and truly love it. And I hope you go out today and pick it up and just happy as can be as you fly around the Texas skies in your spectacular Skylane.
Until I get the bill.
Hey, man, thanks a lot. And I like your idea. We should do a piece on pre-buy inspections because, I've known some people who skip that step to save $1,000 or $1,500. And man, were they sorry later.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
All right. Hey, you have a great afternoon. I'm going to do my best to enjoy myself here in the quagmire of Florida. It's horrible. We've gotten into the winter season now, so it's like in the 70s and 80s, and it's awful.
So
It's
now you
just
have to wear
awful,
long
Pat.
pants. Is that what you're telling me?
I actually wore long pants and shoes yesterday at the
Whoa.
same time. It was
Whoa.
weird. Hey,
Well,
buddy, we'll see you later. And folks, thanks so much for watching with us. Click like below. Leave us a comment on your thoughts on the Cessna 182, the Skylane, or any other airplane that you would like to hear more about. And subscribe to the channel if you would, because it helps the algorithm and it makes Pat smile. So we'll see you next time.